It was supposed to be our perfect anniversary, one of those days where love sparkles in every glance and every whispered promise feels eternal. But as I stepped into the sterile corridors of her office building, my heart pounded with a mix of excitement and dread that I couldn't quite explain. I had planned a surprise visit to celebrate our years together, expecting nothing more than her radiant smile and a tender reunion. Instead, the day unraveled into a cruel revelation that shattered everything I thought we were. In those first moments, as fluorescent lights and hushed conversations surrounded me, I sensed that something was irrevocably wrong. I had always believed in the power of surprises, how the unexpected could breathe new life into a long, predictable routine. For our 10th anniversary, I wanted to recapture that magic. I remembered our early days, when spontaneity was our constant companion, when every meeting was a serendipitous collision of two hearts. So, on that crisp, clear morning, I decided to drop by her office unannounced. I recalled the warmth in her voice during our late-night calls, the laughter that used to echo between our shared memories. I thought this surprise visit would be a testament to our commitment, a gesture that said, "I am here for you, always." But the moment I walked through the glass doors and into the reception area, something felt off. The building buzzed with routine business chatter, and I barely caught a glimpse of her smiling face. Instead, my eyes were drawn to a corridor where muffled voices and tense laughter drifted from behind closed doors. As I walked slowly toward her floor, my heart hammered harder, and I began to notice subtle clues, a framed photo of her smiling with colleagues that looked forced, hushed whispers among staff that ended as soon as I passed by. My mind raced with half-formed suspicions. Had our marriage become so shallow that even her co-workers sensed it? I found her office unexpectedly empty. The room, usually warm with personal touches, photos of our family, a carefully arranged vase of fresh flowers, was stark and impersonal today. I hesitated at the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle, and for a moment, I questioned the wisdom of my impromptu visit. My intuition screamed at me to turn around, to flee before I uncovered a painful truth. Yet, I stepped inside, driven by a desperate need to see her, to confront whatever it was that had shifted so drastically between us. The space was cold, the hum of the air conditioner almost mocking in its indifference. I searched for her among the cubicles, the conference rooms, and the scattered workstations, but there was no sign of her. Instead, I found a series of documents on her desk, reports, emails, and meeting notes that were not in her usual style. The neatly arranged files now bore annotations in a hurried, unfamiliar script. As I flipped through them, my eyes caught a series of emails that spoke of secrecy, financial discrepancies, and, most damning of all, a suggestion that she had been hiding something significant from me. Every email I read twisted the knife deeper. The sender's words were blunt and devoid of any hint of affection, and the correspondence spanned months. It wasn't long before I discovered that the emails were addressed to someone named R. The tone was businesslike at first, but as I scrolled down, the language grew more personal, almost intimate. There were discussions of shared plans, secret meetings, and promises that were meant to last far beyond the confines of a mere professional relationship. I felt my stomach drop with each word, as the realization seeped in, she had been leading a double life. As the shock took hold, I sank into the chair by her desk, the documents scattering around me like the fragments of a broken dream. I struggled to comprehend the betrayal, not just the act itself, but the sheer depth of the deception. How long had this been going on? How many anniversaries had I celebrated while she was carving out a secret existence? My mind reeled with the possibility that every smile, every loving word, had been part of an elaborate facade. In the midst of my agony, I found an envelope tucked away in the corner of her drawer. It was addressed to me in her familiar handwriting, a note that I had assumed was a late addition to our anniversary plans. With trembling fingers, I opened it, hoping against hope that it might contain an explanation, a sincere apology. Instead, it contained a single sentence, scrawled hastily, "I'm so sorry, but I can't do this anymore." The simplicity of those words belied their devastating impact. It was as if the final act of our marriage had been sealed in that brief, indifferent note. The room spun around me. I sat there, frozen in disbelief, as the weight of the moment pressed down like a suffocating shroud. Every memory of our shared past, the laughter, the whispered promises in the dark, the tender embraces, now felt like distant echoes of a love that had been irrevocably lost. My mind screamed in a cacophony of confusion and despair. How could something so ordinary, a surprise visit, a simple day at the office, end with me holding the evidence of our unraveling? And yet, here it was, the incontrovertible proof of a betrayal that I had never even dared to imagine. In that lonely, sterile office, I made a decision. I couldn't remain in this limbo of half-truths and shattered illusions. The overwhelming pain of betrayal had already fractured every piece of trust one had ever placed in her, and I knew that my heart could no longer sustain the weight of such deception. In a moment of anguished clarity, I reached for my phone and composed an email, a final, irrevocable declaration that marked the end of everything we had once promised to build together. I filed for divorce that day, the click of the send button echoing like the closing of a chapter one had thought would last a lifetime. As I left the office building, the cool air hit me like a baptism of bitter reality. The city around me bustled with indifferent activity, unaware of the personal tragedy unfolding in its midst. Every step away from that place felt like a step toward a future defined not by loss, but by the possibility of healing, of rebuilding a life stripped of facades. My heart was heavy with sorrow, yet beneath that sorrow stirred the faint stirrings of liberation, a promise that, in time, I would learn to trust again, to love again, even if it meant starting from scratch. I walked aimlessly through the streets, each footstep a painful reminder of what had been and what now lay ahead. The faces around me blurred into a mosaic of indifferent strangers, their lives continuing as if my heartbreak were nothing more than a distant, passing storm. Yet inside, I felt every drop of pain with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. In that moment, I vowed to myself that I would not let this betrayal define my future. I would gather the shattered pieces of my heart, and somehow, amid the ruins of what we once had, I would find a way to forge a new beginning. The shock of that final moment in her barren office still clung to me as I stepped out into the brisk afternoon. The cool air, meant to be refreshing, only deepened the hollowness inside me. I found myself wandering the busy streets with my mind consumed by a painful montage of memories, our shared laughter on lazy Sunday mornings, the way her eyes would light up when she talked about her day, and the quiet promises exchanged in the stillness of night. Now, all those moments felt tainted by the cruel irony of that surprise visit, where a simple celebration turned into the unraveling of everything I once held dear. 4 hours, I roamed aimlessly, trying to piece together fragments of a life that now seemed like a series of rehearsed lies. The city buzzed around me, indifferent to my private catastrophe, its constant hum echoing the emptiness in my chest. I passed by familiar storefronts, our favorite coffee shop where we'd once lingered over long conversations, and even the park where we'd carved our initials into a bench. Every sight, every sound, was a reminder of what was lost, a life built on promises that had been quietly shattered. At one point, I found myself sitting on a cold stone bench in a nearly deserted park, the remnants of autumn leaves crunching underfoot. I stared blankly at the sky, unable to shake the overwhelming grief and betrayal that churned within me. Questions swirled relentlessly. How had I failed to see the signs? Had I been so blinded by love that I refused to notice her gradual withdrawal? The answers eluded me, leaving only a bitter taste of regret and self-doubt. My phone lay silent in my pocket, a mute testament to the finality of what had just happened. I had sent that email, filed for divorce, with a numb determination, and as soon as I pressed send, I knew there was no turning back. The reality of that decision began to sink in, and I wondered how one could ever rebuild when the very foundation of trust had been obliterated. I felt as if I was standing on a cliff's edge, the precipice of a future I hadn't chosen, with nothing but uncertainty stretching out before me. Over the next few days, I immersed myself in a blur of restless activity and reluctant isolation. I avoided familiar places where our memories were etched into every corner, and instead retreated to a modest hotel far from the life we'd built together. In that sterile room with its crisp, white sheets and unfeeling walls, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of my solitude. At night, I would sit by the window watching the city lights flicker like distant stars, each one a reminder that life, in all its relentless motion, continued unabated even as mine had come to a screeching halt. I began to write, not for anyone else but for myself, a desperate attempt to articulate the swirl of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. I filled pages with raw confessions, my hurt, my anger, and an aching sorrow for the love I thought was unbreakable. In the quiet solitude of that temporary refuge, I discovered that writing was not merely an act of catharsis, but also a way to reclaim a piece of the self I had thought lost. Every word was a small stitch mending the tear in my soul, a silent declaration that despite everything, I was still here. There were moments when the loneliness was almost unbearable, when the echo of her voice in my memory made my chest tighten with both longing and betrayal. In those dark hours, I turned to old friends, people who had witnessed the vibrant love we once shared. Over cups of bitter coffee in the early morning, I recounted the story as if it were a tragic novel, each friend lending a sympathetic ear and words of consolation. They reminded me that sometimes the heart must break to allow space for something new, something more genuine. Their gentle reassurances, however, did little to dispel the emptiness that had settled deep within me. One friend, David, in particular, urged me to seek professional help. "Sometimes, Mark," he said one rainy afternoon, "the deepest wounds require more than just time to heal. You deserve to understand what happened, not just on the surface, but the why behind it." His words, though meant to be kind, forced me to confront the reality that I wasn't prepared to let this chapter close on its own. Reluctantly, I agreed to see a therapist, a decision that marked the beginning of an arduous journey toward understanding not only the betrayal but also my own part in the unraveling of our shared dreams. In the quiet, warmly lit office of Dr. Ellis, I began to unravel the layers of my pain. Over several sessions, we delved into memories, dissected the moments of doubt I had once brushed aside, and questioned the patterns of behavior that had led to this point. I discovered that beneath the surface of my heartbreak lay a simmering need for validation, a need that had made me blind to the subtle cues of discontent. Dr. Ellis helped me see that while I could not change the past, I could learn from it and rebuild a foundation strong enough to support a future unburdened by betrayal. Yet, even as therapy offered glimmers of insight and solace, the raw wound of her secret, her concealed office visits, the hushed exchanges, the cold emails addressed to someone named A, continued to haunt me. I would catch myself pausing at a familiar spot in the office building where I had once felt nothing but pride and admiration, only to be overwhelmed by the memory of that fateful anniversary visit. At night, as I lay awake in a quiet hotel room, I would replay the sequence of events, each repetition carving deeper into my heart the truth of her deception. I began to wonder about the life she had led behind the polished veneer of her professional success. What had driven her to maintain that double life? Had the pressures of her career, the isolation of long hours and high expectations, driven her to seek validation elsewhere? I started piecing together clues from our past conversations, fragments of a woman who sometimes spoke of feeling unappreciated or invisible, even in our happiest moments. It was a realization that stung with its own brand of sorrow. Perhaps her betrayal wasn't solely about infidelity, but about her own struggle to find meaning and connection in a life that had grown increasingly empty. In one particularly poignant session, I recalled a conversation from a few years back when she had admitted feeling trapped by the relentless demands of her job, a confession she had quickly brushed aside with a forced smile. At the time, I had reassured her that our love would always be a refuge, a sanctuary from the relentless grind of corporate life. Now, I understood that no amount of loving words could erase the loneliness that had crept into her heart. That understanding, however painful, forced me to see the situation with unsettling clarity. Her betrayal was as much a symptom of her inner turmoil as it was a personal failing. I began to venture out more, seeking distractions in the quiet corners of the city, an old record store with dusty vinyl, a tucked-away cafe where the aroma of fresh pastries mingled with the murmur of soft conversations. In these solitary excursions, I slowly began to reconstruct my sense of self, separate from the identity I had shared with her. Each small act of rediscovery, whether it was strumming a few chords on my neglected guitar or capturing the fleeting beauty of a rainy day with my camera, was a step toward reclaiming the parts of me that had been overshadowed by our shared life. I also returned to writing with renewed vigor, not just as a means of coping, but as an exploration of my own desires and dreams. I poured out my thoughts in long, uninterrupted sessions, exploring the bitter lessons of betrayal and the unexpected freedom that sometimes followed the end of a chapter. I wrote about the paradox of pain, that while it can leave scars, it also paves the way for growth, for the discovery of inner strength that we never knew we possessed. In those pages, I found a strange sort of beauty, the resilience of the human spirit, its capacity to adapt and flourish even after the deepest wounds. Yet, the specter of that anniversary visit, the shock of walking into her empty office and discovering a life of secrets, remained a constant presence. It would surface unexpectedly, in a scent that reminded me of her perfume or in the casual mention of her new project at work. And each time, I felt a pang of sorrow mixed with a reluctant understanding that the past, no matter how painful, was a part of me that could not be entirely erased. One evening, as the sky turned a deep indigo and the city lights began to shimmer like distant promises, I found myself back at our old neighborhood, a place where every corner held a memory of laughter and love. I sat on a familiar bench in a park we once frequented, watching as families strolled by and children's laughter echoed around me. I wondered if she ever thought of those times, if the love we once shared still lingered somewhere in her heart, even as our paths diverged so irreparably. I allowed myself to feel the full spectrum of my emotions, the searing anger, the piercing sorrow, but also a cautious hope that maybe, someday, I would learn to trust again. In that reflective solitude, I began to draft a letter, not one to be sent, but as a final farewell to the woman I once believed was my everything. With each word, I acknowledged the joy we had shared and the pain that had come with its end. I wrote about the beauty of our early days and the tragic unraveling of trust that had led us to this moment of irrevocable separation. The act of writing this letter, raw and unfiltered, was both cathartic and liberating. It allowed me to confront the painful truth head-on, to accept that the love we had was gone and that I needed to step forward into a future unburdened by the shadows of the past. As days turned into weeks, I slowly began to feel the first tentative stirrings of renewal. I resumed activities I had long abandoned, the weekly game nights with friends, the morning jogs that had once been a staple of my routine. Each small act of normalcy was a reminder that life, in its relentless persistence, always found a way to move forward. I learned to cherish the quiet moments of introspection, recognizing that every ending is also a beginning, however painful the transition might be. The memory of that anniversary, of the shock, the betrayal, and the irrevocable decision to file for divorce, became a turning point. It was the moment when I finally understood that clinging to a past built on deception would only hinder the possibility of a future that was truly mine. I embraced the idea that letting go, though excruciating, was necessary to reclaim my identity and open the door to new experiences, relationships, and perhaps even new love, one that would be honest and whole. Now, as I continue down this uncertain path of recovery, I carry both the scars of yesterday and the quiet hope of tomorrow. I have learned that healing is neither swift nor linear. It is a mosaic of small victories and inevitable setbacks, each one a reminder of my capacity to overcome. The shock of that surprise visit, the emptiness of her abandoned office, and the finality of that heartbreaking email are indelibly etched in my memory. Yet, in time, they have become the crucible through which I have forged a stronger, more resilient self. In the silent moments before sleep, I reflect on all that has transpired, knowing that while the pain may never fully disappear, it has transformed into a guide, an inner compass that now points toward authenticity and self-respect. And so, with cautious optimism and a heart that is slowly mending, I step forward into the unknown, determined to write the next chapter of my life, a chapter defined not by the echoes of betrayal, but by the promise of renewal and the courage to love again. It began as a piercing silence, a moment when the weight of loss, regret, and the promise of rebirth converged into one shattering epiphany. Standing alone in the cold light of dawn, I felt as if every heartbeat echoed the final toll of what once was. The divorce was filed, and with it, I stepped into a new, uncharted life, a life that demanded I shed the past's painful skin to embrace a future that, however uncertain, held the possibility of true freedom. In that quiet, raw moment, I realized that every ending is but the beginning of a transformation I never imagined. In the weeks and months that followed, I embarked on a journey that felt both daunting and oddly liberating. The apartment we once shared, now a gallery of memories and faded promises, became a silent witness to my slow emergence from the wreckage of betrayal. I found myself sifting through remnants of our life together, the photograph of our wedding day, the little notes tucked in lunchboxes, even the single coffee mug she left behind. Each item was a relic of a love that had disintegrated, but as painful as the act was, I recognized that clinging to them would only anchor me in despair. Instead, I began the process of packing away the past, physically and emotionally, to create space for something new. Every morning, as the sun crept through the blinds of my modest new apartment, I would make a deliberate effort to start fresh. I began with small rituals, a hot cup of coffee enjoyed in silence, a brisk walk through the awakening city streets, moments of quiet reflection in the park near my window. In these simple acts, I discovered that healing was not about erasing the past, but about learning to coexist with it, recognizing that every scar, every tear shed, was proof of survival. I took solace in the thought that my heart, though bruised, could still beat with hope and resilience. I enrolled in a local art class, something I'd always dreamed of doing but had postponed in the busyness of our shared life. As I picked up a paintbrush for the first time in years, I felt an unexpected rush of excitement, a reconnect ion with the parts of me that had been silenced by heartbreak. With each brushstroke, I was not just creating images on canvas, I was painting a new narrative for myself, one where sorrow could transform into beauty. The colors, bold and unrestrained, became metaphors for the tumult within me, a mixture of deep blues for the grief and bright yellows for the hope that was beginning to break through. Therapy continued to be a steady companion on this journey. Dr. Ellis, with his gentle guidance, helped me navigate the labyrinth of emotions that surfaced day after day. We delved into the roots of my insecurities, explored the moments when I had overlooked subtle signs of discontent, and slowly began to understand that the betrayal was not solely her failing, it was a wake-up call for me as well. I learned to forgive myself for the times I had been too complacent, too eager to believe that our shared routine was unbreakable. In doing so, I also found room to forgive her, not for the sake of reconciliation, but so that I could finally release the burden of resentment and reclaim my sense of self-worth. One particularly transformative evening, as rain pattered softly against the window and the city lights blurred into a tapestry of moving shadows, I sat down at my desk and began to write. Not a letter to her, not a memoir of our past, but a personal journal, a collection of raw thoughts and honest reflections about who I was becoming. I wrote about the bittersweet moments of our time together, the laughter that once filled our home, and the silent despair that had slowly replaced trust. With every word, I was dismantling the narrative of loss and constructing instead a story of growth, resilience, and the courage to move on. In that act of writing, I found a voice that was distinctly my own, a voice that would no longer be drowned out by the echoes of what once was. Socially, I began to rebuild the connections I had neglected during the years of our marriage. I reconnected with old friends, attending small gatherings and quiet dinners, each encounter a reminder that I was not alone in this journey. Their support, the warmth in their smiles and the empathy in their eyes, slowly helped to patch up the raw edges of my heart. One friend, Lisa, took me on weekend hikes in the nearby hills, where nature's grandeur and the simplicity of the open sky reminded me that life was vast and full of endless possibilities. With each step up the winding trail, I felt a little stronger, a little more grounded in the present moment. Work, once a refuge from the complexities of home, became an arena where I could rediscover my professional ambitions. I took on new projects, challenged myself with creative ideas, and found that the commitment to my career was a way to rebuild confidence in a life that now felt decidedly mine. The office, with its hum of productivity and shared purpose, provided a structured contrast to the chaos of my personal life. It was in those moments, amidst meetings and deadlines, that I learned the value of balancing vulnerability with strength. Yet, even as I made strides in rebuilding, there were days when the wound felt too fresh, when the memory of that shock, the surprise visit to her office, the discovery of secrets, the final, irrevocable act of filing for divorce, would surge back like a tidal wave. On such days, I allowed myself to feel the pain fully. I would sit quietly, sometimes in a corner of my favorite park, and simply let the tears fall. I learned that healing wasn't about suppressing sorrow, but about experiencing it and then slowly letting it go, like autumn leaves carried away by a gentle breeze. One day, as the crisp air heralded the arrival of early winter, I received an unexpected invitation to an alumni reunion, a chance to reconnect with parts of my past that I had left behind. Initially, the thought of confronting old acquaintances filled me with anxiety, but it also offered a chance to step outside the echo chamber of my recent heartbreak. At the reunion, amidst the familiar chatter and shared memories, I found that I was no longer the man defined by a shattered marriage. I was someone who had endured, who had learned to stand on his own, and who had the quiet confidence to engage with life on his own terms. The conversations were laced with genuine smiles and the subtle recognition that, despite life's unpredictable turns, we all carried scars that made us uniquely human. As the months turned into a year, I began to see the light at the end of the tunnel, not as a distant, almost unattainable dream, but as a reality that was slowly, imperceptibly taking shape. The pain of that surprise anniversary visit, the betrayal etched into every crevice of my memory, became less a raw wound and more a faded imprint, a reminder of where I had been and how far I had come. I found solace in the simple acts of living, the warmth of a sunrise, the comfort of a good book, the laughter shared with newfound friends. I even allowed myself to flirt with the idea of new love, a cautious, tentative exploration that didn't promise a fairy tale, but offered a chance to open my heart once more without the weight of expectation. In a quiet moment of reflection, I looked back on our time together not with bitterness, but with a sober understanding of its impermanence. I acknowledged that our love, as intense and all-consuming as it had been, was ultimately unsustainable when built on foundations of secrecy and half-truths. I realized that our story had reached its natural conclusion, a necessary end that, while painful, allowed both of us the opportunity to grow separately. This realization, hard-earned and bittersweet, became the cornerstone of my healing. Now, as I stand on the threshold of tomorrow, I carry with me a newfound sense of clarity and purpose. The divorce, once the symbol of an unbearable betrayal, has transformed into a catalyst for personal evolution. I am learning to love again, not in the desperate, all-consuming way of the past, but with a tempered hope and a guarded openness that honors the lessons of my journey. I no longer see myself as a victim of circumstance, but as a survivor, someone who has faced the depths of heartache and emerged with a resilience I never knew I possessed. In the quiet hours of the night, when the city is hushed and the stars whisper secrets to those willing to listen, I find comfort in the knowledge that every end is simply the beginning of something new. I am writing the next chapter of my life with deliberate care, one where authenticity and self-respect guide my choices, and where the memories of yesterday serve not as chains, but as stepping stones to a brighter, more honest future. And so, with a heart still marked by the pain of betrayal yet buoyed by the promise of renewal, I step forward. I embrace the uncertainty of the road ahead, knowing that every stumble and every small victory is a part of the mosaic of my becoming. I may never forget the day I walked away from her office on what was meant to be our anniversary, but I choose to honor that memory as a turning point, a moment that catalyzed my journey toward a life defined not by the failures of the past, but by the strength to rebuild, to reinvent, and ultimately, to love myself again.